Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. My name is Lucía Osa-Melero, and I'm an associate professor at Duquesne University. And I'm here to present a pilot project about the impact of the deductive versus the inductive teaching approach on the learning of copulative verbs ser and estar. This study took place with students of first semester of Spanish at the college level, and we're focusing on teaching these two verbs in one class via inductive and in another section of the same class via deductive. So ser and estar, as you all might know, they're linking verbs, also called copular verbs, and they're pretty foundational for the learning of Spanish. They are fundamental verbs and basis for progressive tenses, for expressions for telling time, for impersonal expressions, and they're extremely common in everyday situation, everyday conversation. They're usually taught, especially in the present tense, in the first semester in college. First and second week, they see the verb ser in the present tense. By the fifth week, they start seeing the verb estar and its conjugations. And in the 13th week, by the end of the semester, is when the students start focusing on the differences between ser and estar, the usage of the verbo ser and the usage of the verbo estar. When there can be gray areas, and how to decide when to use one or the other. Most Spanish introductory textbooks present, and during the first or the second chapter, those two verbs separately, right? And by the fifth or the sixth chapter, it's when they present those two verbs together. So that's more at the end of the semester of the first introductory level. The textbook Vistas, which is what we use, does this. In the first and second chapter, they're introduced to verb ser and verb estar differently. And then by the fifth and sixth chapter is when students have to know how to use them both at the same time. The textbook that we use here at my university uses the explicit approach towards both verbs. So they do, with lots of detail, describe in English the conditions required for each verb. And they're followed by examples in Spanish. The activities for students to complete after rules are explained also. There is an assessment, and there is a final exam for all elementary Spanish sections here in my university that assesses if the students know how to use in written form correctly the verb ser and the verb estar in one paragraph, one composition, fill in the blanks, different type of evaluations, but both verbs together. They need to differentiate the usage of these two verbs. Ser and estar has been a topic that students report as difficult. And despite the emphasis in the curriculum and efforts from instructors, and even during high school, and the emphasis on these two verbs and how to use them correctly, it's still the students still continue to find challenges to use them accurately. And this is due to several reasons. Well, the first reason is that in English, there's only one, right, to be. So that creates an obstacle there for the students to be able to differentiate and think about the conditions and the context of the verb to decide if they need ser and estar. It's also, sometimes I find that many textbooks have unclear explanations about ser and estar, and the gray areas are not very well explained, and students get confused. Students tend to be more inclined to use verb ser over estar due to the similarity in spelling of the present tense third person singular, es with, is. And some uses, such as characteristics of people and physical conditions, overlap considerably. So there are some examples like es gordo, está gordo, es amigable, está amigable hoy. it's hard for them to grasp the difference, even though there's nuance there. But that gray area is hard to explain, and it confuses the students if they follow the standard rules that they've been given by the textbook. The most common teaching approaches to teach any grammar, especially at the first level, are deductive, explicit teaching. The instructors present the rule, they go to class, they present the rule, and students participate passively, just absorbing the rule while working on decontextualized activities that contain grammatical structures. They have handouts where they have to complete fill in the blanks or matching or multiple choice. They complete activities where they apply the knowledge that they just heard or saw in the whiteboard about, in this case, ser or estar. Inductive teaching, though, it's different. We don't go and present the rule as soon as we get to class. Within inductive teaching, we have two slightly different types. The first one, according to Lin 2009, it's called implicit induction. The learners induce underlying grammar rules from text subconsciously. De Keyser in 1994 already mentioned this approach. Just give them the rules very well contextualized, give them examples of the rule, and they will figure it out unconsciously. And then we have explicit induction, when the learners consciously discover underlying grammar rules by themselves, and they present the induced rules to the class. Schaefer, 1989, uses this approach and has a study in which very successfully she can prove that students using explicit induction were able to retain the grammatical rule longer and more efficiently than other students. We are going to use in this study explicit induction. So the learners consciously discover the rules, and then they have to figure out an explanation to share it with the rest of the class. The inductive approach. Studies contrasting the effectiveness of the deductive and inductive often obtain results favoring the inductive practice, even though there are still studies that show conflicting results. So this is a topic that has created conflict, because there are so many studies that, even though they favor the inductive approach, clash against some studies that are saying, well, no, with the same grammatical topic, the same level of proficiency students, this very similar context, here we saw that the deductive was more efficient. The conflicting results can be attributed to the fact that studies took place within different range of circumstances, different populations, sometimes different numbers of participants. And there are studies that might be testing 75 students versus 10 students. So even though you're testing the same grammatical point, the same type of teaching approach, the fact that the number of subjects changes gives different results, different languages and proficiency levels, different study designs. And the inductive approach takes wide-ranging formats, while the deductive is more consistent. The inductive, it really depends on the instructor and the steps you want to follow and how consistently you follow them. So whether the learner should be exposed to the grammatical rule before applying the grammatical structure, or if the learner should apply the grammatical structures in a functional context before being exposed to the grammatical rule, has been one of the most debated questions in the field of pedagogy. Haidt, Heron, and Cole, 2007. Do we show the rule at the beginning of the class, have the students absorbing the rule and then practicing it in paper or orally, or do we give them the paper and do we give them a listening so they can induce the rules? What is more efficient for the students? What works better long-term? So the research question for this pilot study is, what is the impact of inductive grammar on the learning of the usage of verbs ser and estar at the beginning level of college Spanish instruction? The methods for our study: causal comparative research design, also called ex post facto. It is an empirical study that estimates the causal impact of an intervention in a treatment group to compare it to the absence of this particular intervention in a control group. The control group is going to be the the group that use the deductive approach, and the treatment group is going to be the group that use the inductive approach. The two sections were taught by the same instructor, researcher, and these were randomly assigned to control or treatment group. Students in both sections completed a pre-test and a post-test under exactly the same conditions. It was actually the same day, and it was just an hour of difference. Participants: Spanish Elementary 1, control group, 15 students, 9 females, 6 males. They use the deductive approach. Elementary Spanish 1, treatment group, 16 students, 10 females plus 6 males. They use the inductive group to learn these two concepts. The institution was a mid-sized private university in the Midwest of the United States, and all the students were native English speakers, not categorized as heritage speakers of Spanish. Half of the students, though, 15 of these students were initially exposed to these verbs and its differences in high school. Other students, the rest of the students, 16 more, had never studied Spanish previously. This was truly their first course in a foreign language. The complexity embedded in the usage of these verbs and the lack of well-defined grammatical rules leave students struggling to correctly use these verbs in subsequent semesters. So even though they were exposed to these two verbs in high school, students would come to elementary Spanish 1 in college with a lot of conflict against these verbs and a lot of problems, and they would still use these two verbs in an incorrect way. Students who missed one of the treatment tests, pre or post, were not included in the total N. That's why the total N is 15 versus 16. There were a couple more students in each class, but they were not present for the post test, so they couldn't be part of the participants. Teaching procedures. Inductive approach. The 5 pedagogical steps used to conduct the inductive lesson were the following. First, the instructor presented the targeted grammatical forms. I presented the form ser and estar within a meaningful context. We had a context, it's a description, a personal description about a friend of mine, a dentist. He's a dentist. His name is Gustavo. And it is also an audio expert, so they can listen to the description of Gustavo's life and Gustavo's routine. Instructor encourages learners in pairs to cooperatively recognize the grammatical patterns. So they had the handout and they were listening to the description, and in groups, in pairs, they had to underline where ser and estar was happening. For this purpose, students are asked to focus solely on the target structure. So they wouldn't really pay attention to the rest of the content, but they would try to focus on every time they saw ser and estar and their surroundings. After pattern recognition, students formulate the grammatical rule and make generalizations about the target form and function within the context of the text. So they would find, let's say, 4 examples of ser and 4 examples of estar. They would try to create a rule, define why here we were using ser and why here we were using estar, because there were samples of the same function repeated. Like if ser was used, let's say, for time, there were 2 sentences with time. Or if there was 1 sentence describing the physical appearance as an inner quality, that was also verbo ser, and there were 2 sentences with verbo ser. Learners and instructor confirm the accuracy of the grammatical rule. Once students share the rule, the instructor offers extra and detailed clarification about the structure if necessary. Learners engage in grammatical and guided output practice and discussion within a meaningful context, which means once we talked about the rules, we talked about when we're in this context, we're using ser, and when we are, let's say, talking about location, we're using estar. Once we figure that out and we declare the rules, then we engage in guided output. Pedagogical material. Gustavo es guapo o Gustavo está guapo. En español hay 3 verbos que equivalen al verbo to be, ser, estar y haber, pero en esta lección vas a estudiar solamente ser y estar. Lee la siguiente descripción de mi amigo Gustavo y subraya todos los verbos que pertenecen a ser o estar. So this is what they work in pairs and they start underlining. This is the input. At the same time, they're listening to it also, it's recorded. Then they have to mark ser o estar depending on the definition. I say the verb is used to mark location of a person or an object in general. They go to the text and they're like, the location, that was estar. The verb is used to identify location of events. Then they have to go to the text and see when an event is it's being expressed. Then we go a little deeper with the, those adjectives that change. Es guapo y está guapo. Observa la descripción de Pedro en los dibujos y explica en inglés la diferencia en los usos de los verbos ser y estar. So, en 2019 Pedro es gordo y Manolo es delgado, pero en 2020 Pedro está delgado. So we talk about how something is an inherent quality and then how it changed, and we have to say está because there was a change in that quality. So they say the same adjectives with different verbs and what the nuance in meaning is. And then escriben la explicación en inglés y la escriben en inglés porque así ellos no están batallando. They're not really conflicted by the language. We really want them to focus on the concept. So they have to write in their first language why we used Gustavo es delgado en el 2019 y Gustavo está delgado en el 2020. Con tu compañero, describe la situación que determina el uso de ser o estar en las siguientes oraciones. Gustavo es nervioso, Gustavo está nervioso. Marcos es delgado, Marcos está delgado. Mi novio es celoso, mi novio está celoso. They talk with their partner and explain, okay, I have delgado here, which means thin, but I have es and I have está, and they have to explain in English what that means and why we're using está here and why we're using es in the other sentence. Información importante, adjectives that can only go with star, we just give them to them, cansado, contento, exhausto y enojado, they always go with verbo estar. Y con el verbo ser, we really focus on the essential property of that noun. Gustavo es esencialmente delgado. Gustavo es normalmente delgado, pero ahora, but now, and as a temporary thing, está gordo. So we give them an extra explanation, especially on these cases where both the adjective can use both verbs. How do we assess them? So we do this on one period, one class, right? An hour and 15 minutes. We work inductively with one class and then deductively with the other class. And then the next time we have the assessment. For the assessment, we did a pre-treatment. It was an online quiz with different activities before they were exposed to the differences of ser and estar. And of course, their grades were low because they had never seen them together. And then after the lesson, we do exactly the same online quiz. This online quiz, it's 3 different activities, fill in the blanks, matching, and multiple choice. But I think it's A, B, C, D, and E. It's 5 options. The assessment activities are based on the Superside Vistas quiz battery and the inductive package. I created the inductive package, and there are the activities for them, like guided, very guided and inductively. And then the textbook for the deductive gives them, these quizzes that are supposed to be taken when the students have been exposed to the rule. So I created an online quiz that mixes both approaches, and students have to complete it prior, the pre-treatment, and then the post-treatment. No extra aid, of course, is available. So the input, the first activities match the description from a word bank. They have a word bank, extra words that do not have a match also, and then they have to put the words in the sentences that they have below, right? Those words are the verbs, conjugated verbs. Then choose the right conjugated verb, output, create meaningful sentences. You just give them the infinitives and they have to create meaningful sentences, conjugating, deciding if they want the ser or if they want to estar, and then conjugate it correctly in the sentences that you give them. And 3, they have to write a correct answer using the present tense of ser and estar. You don't give them anything, and they have to think of ser and estar and produce it. In this activity 2, they choose. We give them the verbs conjugated and they just choose estamos, somos, son, están. In the third one, it's really output. They have to produce the verbs. And that's 56% of the grade. Number one and number two, because it's just a matter of choosing, it's 22% each activity. But the third one, it's 56%. They have sentences and they have to fill in the blanks with a conjugated form of ser and estar. This is an assessment sample. Match the description. 3 items from the list might not be used. So the list have está ocupado, está en verde, estamos listos. 1. Tenemos que salir ahora mismo. No debes comer las peras ahora. El señor Gómez tiene mucho trabajo. So tenemos que salir ahora mismo. Would go with estamos listos. No debemos comer las peras ahora. Están verdes. El señor Gómez tiene mucho trabajo. Está ocupado. The list was way longer. Just in this slide, I couldn't include everything. And then there were like 8 sentences and they had to be matching. Mi esposo es o está muy alto. Tú eres, estás puertorriqueño. And they had to select the correct option. And they had photos that went with the sentences to contextualize visually the sentence. And here we don't even give them the infinitive, but they have to pick ser and estar and complete the paragraph about mis amigas y yo en un momento que nos fuimos de vacaciones y what we do now and how we feel now. Results. The class that had to be where we implemented the inductive treatment. In the pre-treatment quiz, the average of the scores for those 16 students was 52.3%. In the deductive class, where we just taught the way we used to teach deductively, the control group, 42.3. The same quiz with these 3 different sections, these different activities that were assessing the differences of usage in ser and estar. The inductive got 80.7 and the deductive 49.5. The lower score, though, for the inductive, 32%. There was a student who got a 32% in the post-treatment quiz, but the deductive, the lower score was 22. The lowest score was 22%, and the highest score in the post-treatment was 100%. And the deductive, it was 94. Nobody got 100% in the control group in the deductive class. These are the results in the form of a table, so we can see it. The pre-treatment, the difference was not as big, so they knew less than 50%, or just the inductive a little bit, but the inductive kind of took off all the way to 80. And the deductive stayed around the 50%. This is the average score. I'm averaging the grades of the 15 students in that class. The difference between the pre-treatment average of scores is 10%. There is a difference of 10% favoring section with the inductive treatment. That is in the pre-treatment. But when we go to the post-treatment, you should expect kind of the same. The difference in the post-treatment average of scores is 31.2%, favoring the section with the inductive treatment. So it's definitely higher. It's 21.2 more than the pre-treatment. The inductive section improved its grade by 28.4%, the average, but the deductive section improved its grade by only 7.2%. There was a very small improvement. Results by activity. So I went and I decided to study by each type of activity if I could figure out what activity really gave the inductive section a little boost. So la actividad 1 une la oración con la descripción, where they had the description, where they just match the description with the sentence and see what sentence would go well in terms of meaning with the expression. 57% pre-treatment, we're talking here about the inductive group, and 86% post-treatment. Selecciona la opción correcta de ser o de estar, already conjugated, 56% in the pre-treatment, 82 in the post-treatment. And completa usando el verbo y la forma adecuada, as this is where they have to produce ser and estar, 42% versus 72%. Deductive, 16 students here. In the first one, where they had to match those sentences with the expressions that agreed in terms of content and in terms of meaning, 41% for the pre-treatment, 49% for the post-treatment, not that much of improvement. Actividad 2, selecciona la opción correcta. Select ser, estar, somos, estamos, son, está. From 52% in the pre-treatment to 59% in the post-treatment. And activity 3, completa usando el verbo y la forma adecuada, the creative one, what they had to decide what verb and what form they wanted to use, from 35% to 40%. So the discussion of this pilot study would lead us to think that the overall difference between the average of means is 30.5% more, favoring the inductive approach versus the deductive. The 15 students in the inductive class have an average of 30.5 more. When focusing on each individual section of the assessment, the results still favor the inductive approach. Each section, the matching, the choosing the right answer, and the producing by yourself your output. Match sentence with description, 37% difference. Select the correct option. There was a 23% difference between means favoring the inductive, and when they had to write the correct form, they wrote it correctly 32% more times in a correct way than the other class. So we could conclude that this study was built on prior research examining the effect of inductive teaching strategies in L2 classes, right? It was built after seeing that there were conflicting results about these two approaches and teaching several grammatical points like objects, pronouns, the use of subjunctive versus indicative, and even ser and estar. This study pushed the debate a little step further by focusing on how beginning students of Spanish enhance the correct use, form, and selection of verbs ser and estar in a focused closed type quiz and an output activity. It pushed a little bit further. It really proved that the students in the inductive section were able to, in the 3 different types of evaluation, 3 different types of assessment, to surpass their counterparts in the deductive class. Limitations of the study. There is obviously a considerable small number of participants, total of 93, 16 in the deductive class, 15 in the inductive class, and this affects the generalization of the results, so it's hard to generalize. Additional methods of grammar assessment should be implemented. For example, I should have used multiple choice tests. Less control formats such as guided and creative writing would have given me the idea if they're able to create like creative output using correctly these verbs, ser and estar. More spontaneous activities, spontaneous speaking, short written and oral answers, asking them a question and see if they're able to use the verb correctly in the answer. There are different types of assessments and evaluations that we could have done with these students to prove that they master the skills of ser, they can master the verbs ser and estar in a controlled context. And thank you for listening. I hope it gave you a little bit of a snippet of how important it's to include inductive approach for some grammatical points that bring challenges to the class and that are seen as students as a hard topic to deal with and a hard topic to master. I think the inductive can help us, can be our assistant, and can help us go to class with a different outlook and a more fluent and a more, I would say, more integrated approach and more integrated perspective towards a grammatical topic that the students already think is hard. So I hope you can put it into practice And if you have any questions about how to put every step by step, I don't have much time in 30 minutes, but I can help you design the activities, and I can guide you step by step to go out, to come out to the assessment and be able to prove that when you use the inductive approach to explain a specific grammatical topic, the student learning improves and gets a little higher. Thank you for listening. And if you would like a copy of the activities, please email me to my Duquesne email. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.